Hey everybody, Dr. Misty here. Thanks for joining in on Wellness Wednesday. Today I wanted to dive into different types of fatigue, specifically for patients or people with developmental trauma, PTSD. Sometimes a lot of the symptoms can overlap, and so how do you tell the difference between emotional exhaustion, chronic fatigue syndrome, and fibromyalgia, or an autoimmune issue, because that's really, really common. So, I wanted to address that first. Like, some of the biggest things that trauma survivors can deal with are autoimmune issues, chronic fatigue syndrome, and fibromyalgia. Okay. So there are differences between these things. Okay, so let's kind of delve into what each of them is and give you an idea of what you might feel in your body so you know what you're dealing with, right? Chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia first. So these are kind of, they're more blanket terms. There's chronic fatigue syndrome can be synonymous with myalgia encephalitis, which is like a lot of times viral infection. But really, it's a level of exhaustion that is unmanageable. You are unable to get out of bed and move. You have extreme exertion fatigue, meaning like you get really tired doing anything. You get tired trying to do the dishes, things like that. With fibromyalgia, you might feel that on top of different types of pain syndromes. Fibromyalgia usually has like a pain component to it. With chronic fatigue, sometimes you can feel almost like a weightedness in your body as well. With chronic fatigue, things like that. You might feel a lot of brain fog. You might feel and this is pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent. And usually with chronic fatigue, the worse, the more you have exertion, the more that you have, issues with fatigue, the more that you have to sit down, okay? So that's what you might experience with chronic fatigue. Now, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are multi-layered issues, okay? So I'll delve into that in a little bit. Let's talk about autoimmune fatigue. Okay, so a lot of people I've worked with have definitely underlying autoimmune issues, which means self-attack. And it typically comes with a pretty consistent fatigue, just kind of like an overall exhaustion. This one you might actually have more skin rashes with. Okay, look for problems with gut and skin with autoimmune reactions. That can bring on swelling. Typically with autoimmune type of issues, you are going to see a lot more, swelling, joint stiffness, pain, things like that. Fibromyalgia is a little more different. Fibromyalgia it's not like joint aches and pain. There's specific spots around like the neck and shoulders, and it's more like muscle types of pain, and a lot of point tenderness on the back. Autoimmune fatigue can definitely get worse after eating specific types of foods, or adjusting specific types of medications. That can get worse after, certain viruses, or depending on what type of autoimmune you have. But it's usually just like a consistent, heavy, like you're just exhausted all the time. You're exhausted. Okay. Now people can get autoimmune issues. It's no wonder actually that a trauma survivor gets autoimmune issues, because autoimmune literally means self-attack. So your immune system is attacking your own tissues. So you may be predisposed to that, but genetically that's going to be turned on sometimes more. Like, I don't know about you, but as a trauma survivor, I tend to have periods of time where I have that like kind of turning on myself or self-attack It's like a safety mechanism that you like blame yourself for everything. Or you like, you try and do better and you're just super, super, super hard on yourself. That can actually trigger a lot more of the autoimmune response and inflammation. Okay, so again, autoimmune, you're thinking also gut, you're thinking swelling, you're thinking joint pain, you're thinking skin rashes, things like that. Can be worse after eating, can be worse after specific infections, and it's pretty consistent. Okay. Emotional exhaustion and like chronic stress and adrenal issues. So this is the kind of fatigue that is going to kind of dip up and down. Okay, and it's going to dip up and down depending on your level of stress. Okay, because your adrenal glands and your stress hormones are going to be regulating your body throughout the day. And so people with like heavy amounts of chronic stress and adrenal issues, particularly, there's a lot of studies done of children even after abusive situations, and their cortisol levels are very, very low. Okay, so your body needs that cortisol for what's called circadian rhythms. It's like your sleep-wake cycle, right? That your cortisol helps to regulate your body's sleep-wake rhythm. Okay, and it helps to manage inflammation. So if your body is having low levels of cortisol from this chronic stress state, then you're going to have a lot more time fighting inflammation, and you're also going to have a difficult time with sleep-wake cycles. So you can get more insomnia. By this type of fatigue, you're typically going to feel utter exhaustion in the morning, and then maybe 2 o'clock dips. Okay, you might have that crash. You're like, you love coffee, things like that, and it's going to kind of go up and down. And then the aspect of the emotional exhaustion with it is going to be dependent on, you're going to have days that are really okay if you're doing more self-care and resting, but depending on if you are somebody who's a little bit more of a sensitive or empathic person, you're able to pick up on energies a little more, and you might even be somebody who's in kind of a state of your job might be in a healing profession or with children or things like that. You're typically more nurturing. That can bring on more emotional fatigue and compassion fatigue, because you're kind of like taking on some other people's emotional states and trying to help. And that can kind of you tend to end up in an emotional chronic stress burnout, because you're trying to do too much. And so over time you get those like the really tough waking up in the morning. Another thing is sugar and salt cravings with this kind of fatigue. Okay. And then the other thing that's going to help this and let you know whether or not it's more emotional exhaustion is actually the company that you're around. So if you're feeling more exhausted around somebody who in your gut and your heart you feel just like utterly drained, or after being around them, there's an aspect of like energy vampire. There's some people who have tendencies to kind of take from others, hence obviously trauma survivors can completely understand that, or if they've ever been in emotionally or any other abusive situations. There's definitely people who are on the take. And so if you are more of an empathic type of person, this specifically relates to you, because you have to be a little bit more aware and guarded of how you take on other people's energy and emotional states, and kind of try and like overly put yourself in people's shoes and things like that. So that's kind of where emotional exhaustion comes in. Okay. Why do I mention that in all of this too? Because fatigue is such a loaded issue. Tired, right? There are so many things that can be the cause of that, but particularly they're usually intertwined in trauma survivors. So a lot of times, patients I've seen with chronic burnout, right? They have a autoimmune thyroid disease, their adrenals are shot, they've got tons of inflammation, and then they're in some sort of abusive relationship or past abusive relationship, or they're co-parenting with an abuser or things like that. So it's like, there's so many elements to fatigue, and it's just something that's not it's not really addressed as well and efficiently. So I think that's really important for a trauma survivor to understand, is that there's usually multiple answers. There's not always like one specific diagnosis. There's usually kind of a multitude of functional stuff going on, and it all relates to each other, right? So one of the things I want to share with you is that the good news is that, like, a lot of people who I've worked with, I've seen really amazing things where they're able to get their adrenals back to functioning and their autoimmune numbers go into remission if you can do like the right things, right? So depending on, you have to know kind of what the primary fatigue is. So if it's more chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, typically I work with people more on an inflammation and either a detox or mitochondrial level, like a cellular energy level, okay? Just to give you an idea of how people can help themselves outside of, exercise, take medicine. And, let's be honest, like, if you are a developmental trauma survivor, that comes with you're trying to, fight through a lot of stuff on a day-to-day basis, especially if you have some level of complex PTSD or PTSD. There's a lot that comes with that. So the traditional advice of, like an antidepressant, get more exercise, go out with other people and stuff, like, that's not necessarily going to be helpful. It can almost be shaming to somebody who is a trauma survivor, because you want to have, feel better, you want to get out there and exercise and things like that. But sometimes it's like, getting up and getting going is a big thing, so I just kind of want to validate that experience if anybody else has ever experienced that, and can understand how that feels. Like, you want to be feeling better, you want to go out and do those things, but you're trying to figure out how to get the energy to actually go out and do those things also. So, traditional, I feel like that can be helpful and kind of a combination of things, but really, it's a step-by-step process trying to get your inflammation levels down. More often than not, a lot of times people with chronic fatigue syndrome actually have toxic mold, believe it or not. So that's something to really consider when, no, I'm not done yet. I'll be right out. When you have chronic fatigue syndrome, it used to be called toxic mold or damp building syndrome, actually. But oftentimes I think that trauma survivors, and specifically people with fibromyalgia at the same time, also have a component of that. And I think it's from some of the chronic stress and some of the emotional imprinting that happens there. So another thing that you could do to, hey guys, I'm just, okay. Another thing you can do if you are somebody with more of that crash kind of burnout, like you're noticing the adrenals and stuff, you're having like stress and adrenal issues, you really want to think about your sugar levels as well as caffeine levels, so things like that. Also trying to get more ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is really helpful with hormones in general. And detoxification can be really good, but just ashwagandha in general can help with the boosting and keep breaking down your cortisol levels a little slower. So that helps with boosting some of those energy levels in the morning and in the afternoon. The other quick tip would be trying to get either a B vitamin in to help boost your energy and mitochondrial levels, and maybe switching in the afternoon to a kombucha or some sort of green tea or something like that to help with the energy levels. Kind of play around with it and see if it helps you at all, okay? The other thing that you can also do is, if you have some insomnia, using blue light sunglasses are really powerful. Like a lot of people are, home. We're still in quarantines and things like that. So we're all using computers. So using blue light blocking sunglasses is really powerful, especially all day, because what that does is it helps your body naturally produce melatonin, which helps you go to sleep. Okay, so if you're wearing blue light blocking sunglasses, the blue light from screens really blocks your melatonin, and it stops you kind of from falling asleep really easily. So that can be a really natural, helpful type of thing. If you're somebody who's chronically stressed, you do have PTSD from that stuff, and then you're sitting on the computer all day and stuff, might find to be something that you consider. And for people with autoimmune, that one is a little trickier, and that one has a little bit more to do with inflammation levels. So the best thing I could say there would definitely be to start working on your gut health a lot. Doing things, adding glutamine to your diet, having bone broth, using bone broth, whether it's powdered or fresh made, things that will help with your GI tract lining. Particularly, I like to use with people specific types of diets and cleanses to help with that kind of stuff, but that can really bring down the autoimmune issue, and some of those fatigue levels, because that's a big part of it. It's interesting because a lot of people deal with this kind of stuff, but again, when you are having a complex amount of stuff going on, if you're a trauma survivor, you have a whole set of symptoms that sometimes in the medical model it's kind of lumped under one thing, and it's usually not just one thing. Your body is so complex and it works together with so many systems, so you really want to think about where things are coming from, and see if you are somebody who is experiencing those types of fatigues, see which one maybe matches what you're experiencing, and then try some of those recommendations. If you are somebody who is really struggling with any of this kind of stuff and wants help, I do virtual consultations for patients. You can book right off drmisty.com. I do a lot of functional medicine testing, and a lot of the stuff that I look at with people is through specialized custom testing. So I'd love to help. If this resonates with you, please reach out and I'll help you any way I can. Thanks so much for watching tonight. I hope you found that valuable. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, and comment below on what was most helpful for you, so I know in future videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.